Alright, class. So the next part of your March holiday assignment is learning about graphs. Alright, this segment will be divided into three different parts. The first part, let me go back. The first part of your lesson, alright, will be introducing to you both the data table and the graph. The next part of this lesson is basically how to draw your graph. And the last part of the lesson is how to draw a best fit line or curve. Alright, so basically these three things will be done um, in this lesson, and you will be exposed to them as we do more practicals from term 2 onwards. Right, so without further ado, let me introduce to you the first part. Right, data table, the basics. Alright, now in order to plot a graph, there must be at least two columns of physical quantities in the data table. Alright, because there are two axes in the graphs, you must have at least two columns. So in this data table that is given to you, you see that the two columns of physical quantities are the x slash cm column and the y slash cm column. Now, if we are plotting the graph of y against x, we need to have these two in our table. Alright, sorry, there's a typo there. Yeah. So these two must be present. Now, so I'm plotting y against x. So when I use this phrase y against x, right, I'm saying that this y is actually the vertical axis and this x is my horizontal axis. Now, if you do not know what's the meaning of vertical and horizontal, it's basically saying that this is my horizontal and this is my vertical. Alright, meaning to say this should be the y and this should be the x. Alright, take the next 10 seconds to digest this. Now I'll be using all these terms very frequently, like plotting the graph of t squared against m, plotting the graph of s against m, things like that. Okay, so moving on. Now, each physical quantity must have a heading consisting of the symbol for the physical quantity and its unit. Now, what this means is, now, these two are called the physical quantities. Okay, and in this column itself, this dark blue column, right, you see that these two are the headings. Heading number 1 and heading number 2. Now, each heading must be accompanied by a symbol, which is the x or the y, and its unit, which is the cm. Alright, it's separated by the slash. Okay, so if it's difficult to see, this is what you should write. Sorry, y slash cm. Now, in the event where you forget to put the units, okay, you will be penalized. Okay, now the unit is basically telling me that anything that falls within here are all in the units of cm. Anything that falls within here are also in the units of cm. Alright, later, as you are doing your work, you realize that not all of them are all cm. There's some slight difference in the questions, but or rather 99% of the time when you do practical, they are not the same. Alright, so let me move on. Now, typically for a straight line graph, we need to have at least 5 sets of values. Alright, so if you see from the table, you'll see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets of values. So if the practical requires you to draw a straight line graph, you should have at least 5 sets of values. This is to ensure that your graph is accurate. Okay, now what about curve graphs? Right, typically for a curve graph, we need to have at least 7 sets of values. Right, that means 2 more. Right, obviously the more the merrier, the more accurate your graph will be. Okay, so now take the next 30 seconds to digest all the 5 points that we have just talked about. I'm very sure you have seen these graphs, or rather these tables, in mathematics and in secondary science, so it might not be too foreign to you, but I need you to understand that all the different parts in the graph are absolutely important. So take the next maybe 20 seconds left to look at the table and the points again. Okay, let's move on. Now, after looking at the data table, we want to look at the graph. Alright, so I'm going to go through the basics of a graph. There are a few parts to take note. First is the elements of a graph. Each graph must be accompanied by a graph title. Right, so as you can see, this is my graph title, graph of y against x cm. Alright, which means to say this is on my y-axis and this is on my x-axis. Okay, it need not always be the same, y and y, x and x. It could be maybe r, maybe a. Okay, so please do not think that both must be y, both must be x. Okay, let me erase this. Right, next, there must be axis labels. Axis labels are basically what you see here. Alright, and they must always be accompanied by the symbol of the physical quantity and then the unit. It's always like this. Alright, now next thing is the axis values. Axis values are basically the numbers you see here. These are my axis values. Okay, moving on. Okay, you will see data points labeled with an X. Alright, so there are obviously 6 data points in this graph. All these are all the data points. Now we only use X as an indication of the point. We do not use a dot. Dots are used for finding gradient points. Okay, moving on. Okay, lastly, it is a line on a curve drawn. Alright, if you realize that this line is a pretty straight line, it connects all the 6 points, which is quite rare that you get this kind of graph. Okay, so this is the end of the basics of table and graph. I hope you have understood all of them, if not most of them. Okay, this will be the end of this part. The next part will be on graphing skills. Alright, thank you.